is to try to understand more about the relationship to the environment. So now, since I finished then the sound action project at the end of 2022, I was thinking, okay, well, this has been actually been quite fun to do this one thing per day. And I thought that, well, I'm going to miss this if I'm not coming up with something new. So then in 2023, I have a new project then where I do something every day, and that's the Still Standing project. And this connects to my research and my interest in human micromotion. So basically what I'm doing is that every single day I take my phone, I hang it in the strap on my chest, and I use an app where I record all the sensors on my phone. I also have a GoPro Max camera that is a 360 camera, and then a Amazonics microphone that I place in front of me that captures the kind of the environment that I'm within. And then I stand still for 10 minutes. I do a clap at the beginning and end, kind of synchronize these things. And then also write a diary of how this feels like. And then every day I also post then a graph and some summary of this on Mastodon. But then why on earth would I do something like this? Why is this interesting from a musical perspective? Well, I'll get to that, but let me just first talk a little bit about the RITMO, the center that I'm working on, which is, as I said, a highly interdisciplinary center. We are around 55 full-time researchers working there right now, so it's a pretty big undertaking. We just turned 5 years, and we're running for 5 more years, and we got funding for that, so that's great. And our aim is to expand our understanding of written as a fundamental property of human life. So this is not only about music, although many of us at RITMO work with music, but it's bigger than that, trying to understand more about written also in other things than music. And we're comprised of people coming from 3 different departments. So I'm coming from musicology myself. We also have people from informatics and from psychology, and we are physically located in the same building as the Department of Psychology. That also means that we have a pretty broad spectrum of methods that we use when we do our research, covering from the kind of softest soft to the hardest hard, as we like, from reading and writing books to machine learning and robotics, and with various types of also physiological and bodily measurements, and also brain imaging of various kinds. And my specializations are within kind of the music side of things, both kind of the music analysis or sound analysis and synthesis, but also motion capture and machine learning. So that's kind of what I'm talking mostly about today. So in this sense, at RITMO, we are doing a lot of studies of musicians, increasingly also doing these things outside of the lab in kind of real world venues, where we do motion capture, in this case also eye tracking, pupillometry, and physiological measurements of musicians. We like to also figure out how to work with audiences and capture different things from them. So that's where the strap idea came from, where we developed this Music Lab app where people would wear these on the chest when they are sitting in a concert, and we can capture their motion or micromotion while sitting and listening to music. In our labs, we also work more with full body motion capture and dancing and different things. We have been exploring also various types of micromotion and facial expressions and emotional studies. And we also use these things for creative purposes of various kinds, including also the self-playing guitars. And this is a Kavi, kind of computer-based or an artificial intelligence musician that plays with a human musician, and also robotic musicians playing with the self-playing guitars. So it's a quite varied set of things we are working on. And underlying all of this is that we want to understand more about human cognition and human written through kind of these different topics and empirical areas. Now, micromotion, how does that fit into all of this? Well, most of the things that you saw as I briefly scrolled through the different things that we're working on at RITMO is based on relatively large scale human motion. And I've been for almost a decade now interested in also in micromotion, tiny things in the body. And you could say this also started and kind of came out of this saying that we have, that music makes us move. And we have this FutureLearn course that we've been running for quite some years now, called Music Moves, where we had the subtitle, "Why does music make you move?" And there's kind of this assumption there that music makes you move, and I think many of us have that assumption. But does music actually make you move? I think that's an interesting question, and one that I spent some time on over the last few years. So in this project called Micro, I kind of delved into this a little bit more systematically. And this all started with me teaming up with a dancer choreographer, and we got interested. We started talking about the motion capture system we had in the lab and how precise it was. And she asked me, how precise is it actually? Can you measure just someone standing still, and what does it look like? And I didn't know, so I said, well, let's try. And this is a screenshot from the first video we did together. We decided to stand still on the floor, and then we stood there, and she asked me, well, how long are we going to stand still? I didn't know, so I said, well, let's stand still for 10 minutes. It felt like something that is kind of not too short, not too long. And it was interesting. We both enjoyed it, really. And we also found the results from this interesting. So we did it again and again, and a couple of more times. And we started kind of a more systematic study of how it felt like to stand still on the floor. And this was just in silence. This grew, and based on some of the preliminary data that we got out of this, we managed to get some funding from the Arts Council of Norway, and that kind of gave us the possibility to expand this even more and stand more still. So over the coming year, we stood still more than 100 times and documented these things. So this is a plot of a head marker of a person standing still for 10 minutes, 600 seconds. And the three axes here are the dimensions, where X is the kind of the sideways, Y is back and forth, and Z is the height. So that's also what you can see on the left side here. If you look at the millimeters here, you see that there's quite different scale difference, which makes sense because you mainly sink a little bit here in the kind of in the up and down position. You're swaying most back and forth because the sideways you're stabilized by your feet. So this makes sense. And there are interesting things. And one thing is looking at the red line, which is kind of tells you something about the trend, but also then these other kind of fluctuating patterns, the kind of these rhythmic elements in there are interesting. So from this, there are many things you can do with this. For example, you can recognize a person by, for example, looking at kind of the plotting the XY here, where kind of this is looking from above with the noise pointing forwards, and you see kind of the swaying pattern. So a person, and this can actually be seen as something like a fingerprint, where you can kind of get an idea of who the person is by looking. So if you do clustering of this with machine learning techniques, you're able to quite accurately identify people, although there are certainly more easy ways of identifying a person than doing this, but it's doable. An interesting question that we ask ourselves is, do you move more over time if you stand still like this? And no, you don't really. I mean, in all our plots, and these are just a few, it's a very linear trend in all of them. So people have a very kind of constant level of standstill. When you first stand still, it's kind of basically the same thing. And we've done this now. I've probably done it closer to 1,000 times myself, and it's extremely linear every single time. So, and this goes for other people too. Then a relevant question is, are we actually able to capture this, or are we only measuring noise with our systems? And we also done some systematic studies of this by also putting static markers in our spaces and looking at these. And with our different systems, we can clearly see that the magnitude difference is huge between like a static marker and a head marker. So we know also that we're actually capturing a signal in this. Then what do you do when you stand there? Well, over the years, I've also explored different mental strategies and how they influence or not influence us. They don't really influence the quantitative measurements a lot, but they influence the experience of standing still a lot. So that, but interestingly, it doesn't really have much of an effect on the the quantifiable numbers, at least the quantity of motion. What does matter though is whether you have your eyes closed or open. And if you have your eyes open, you certainly stand stiller than if you close them, which makes sense because you use the eyes to to stabilize. Another thing that is very important is whether you open or lock your knees. So if you lock your knees, you are more stable. But it's not advisable. I mean, any dancer or physiotherapist would kind of ask you to keep your knees open, but then that means that you're more more movable in a way, so you will move more. But if you want to stand as still as possible, you should lock your knees. The feet position matters a lot. Working with dancers, of course, I had to try many different types of feet positions, and yes, you get more unstable the more kind of weird foot position you have. So the best is to stand just kind of regular with the feet under your shoulders. Now, being a music researcher, I mean, just standing still is not particularly interesting, perhaps, or perhaps it is. But one of the aims of the micro project was to also explore how music influences standstill. So one thing was to do this with myself and a few other people. But then to get some more data into this, we decided to organize a Norwegian Championship of Standstill back in 2012 to get more people into the lab. So we ran this as a competition during the annual open day at the university. And I think I have a video here just showing some of this. Let me just jump a little bit here to give you a sense of how this would look like. In this case, we had multiple people coming into the lab, and then we were playing different types of music to them. And as you see here, people are standing still, but you can still see movement going on, which is not that strange because people do sway all the time. And here you also see that people have many different strategies for standing still. We tested with different types of music, both kind of very calm, meditative type of music and more rhythmic music and dance music. And didn't really know what to find. So this was very exploratory back then. Then looking at the results from this then was interesting because we got 100 people. So we had more of a variation to look at. And again, looking at the linearity of this, most people are very linear with a few outliers kind of that took off eventually. In this case, we kind of went from various kind of music with little rhythmic or with little pulse and to more rhythmic music later on. And we also looked at the kind of basic differences between standing still with or without sound. And we did find a small effect of standing there with sound, but this wasn't really controlled very systematically. So we moved on and then looked more into this, kind of the differences between standing still and with silence in music. And there's really not that much of a difference. And in some cases, the people actually stand stiller with some types of music and than others. So that's also an interesting element. But we did find that salsa and EDM, the kind of dance music, had more of an effect. So we kind of continued with the EDM track, since that seemed to be kind of what kind of made people move the most. So in 2017, we did a comparative study looking at Norwegian Telespringer, which has a very kind of difficult or complex rhythmic pattern, some Indian classical music with more kind of free type of rhythm, and EDM with a very kind of clear structured rhythm. And here we got a very clear indication that the EDM certainly triggered people to move much more than other music styles. So we kind of continue to dig into this to try to understand what is it with EDM then that is interesting here. And we compare then some very complex, elaborate EDM tracks with some kind of more medium type of EDM, and kind of also very basic EDM, and also some just a very basic rhythm and metronome to kind of get an understanding of the complexity, but here kept the BPM similar, so that it was kind of comparable between the people. In this study, we also then started looking into the actual patterns of the motion. because we did find that this music systematically made people move more, but we also found some effects of fractality in the motion, which was interesting. Unfortunately, the postdoc that was working on this fractal analysis, he moved on after that, so I haven't been able to follow up on this now. But this was a very interesting line of analysis that I would like to continue sometime in the future. But we did again get very clear evidence that music does indeed induce more movement in people than silence. So in that sense, we got a positive conclusion. Now, then my PhD student Agata Selechowska, she got curious to also investigate: is there a difference between listening to music with headphones or just through speakers when you're standing still? So she ran a separate study on this with full body motion capture, and this was of individuals in the lab, where we looked at then the effect of this. And again, we kind of try to keep the same type of difference between then very simple metronome beats written to more elaborate EDM tracks for this. And we did find that people moved quite a lot more when they were standing with headphones than with speakers, which I guess we concluded that this was probably mainly because you would shut off one of your senses that you would otherwise use to help orientate yourself. There's also some other studies that have shown that if you put kind of earplugs in while standing still, you will move a little bit more than if you're able to actually listen to the environment. So that was one thing. Although we could also have, we did hypothesize also that you could see the other effect, that you would stand still or with headphones, because you would kind of focus more on your own and kind of being in your own bubble. But this was quite clear in this study. Now, another part here was that Agata also looked at different personality traits and individual differences to see if there were anything there. And she did find that empathic concern came out as the only really positive contributor to movement in this study, which fits into other findings where they also found that that the people that score high on empathic concern generally move more to music than others. So that was an interesting finding also in our study, where the task was really to stand still. Now, that was a bunch of things on the more scientific side of this project, but I also had a kind of artistic side to this. I always like to work between art and science, and I like to call myself both a music researcher and a research musician. So alongside the scientific work, I've also had then this kind of creative line, where through what we call Swarm performances, also try to see if we could use then micromotion in artistic practice. So the idea here was really to look at, okay, what's going on when you are standing still? What are the things in your body that make you kind of both experience kind of these tiny things going on in your own body, but also experiencing the tiny things going in other people's bodies. So this was kind of an interesting kind of also side project to this. Let's see if I can manage to. Where's my? There you go. One of the challenges then, when trying to kind of just move from just standing there to actually using it in performance, is to what we said, to be able to control the unintentional, because the micromotion that we're talking about is at the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious, and the voluntary and the involuntary. And trying to figure out, okay, how can we work at that level in a systematic manner? So I teamed up with then 2 dancers and 2 musicians, and we worked on this over a year, where we met regularly. And we developed an evening performance, where the idea was that we would use micromotion as kind of core component in the performance. So we met then, and we stood still every time, and also measuring ourselves. So that's part of also kind of the more scientific work, and also kind of wrote down diaries of the experience of standing still. And then to be able to work with this systematically, we developed what we call the spatio-temporal matrix as a kind of tool for being able to systematically work with actions in space and time. So here we define the meso level as everything kind of normal, in the sense that like a normal action would be like 1 2, or here it says 30 centimeters, it could be also 50, but kind of relatively small. And also the meso level to be within like half a second to 5 seconds, kind of within the short-term memory, more or less. Anything micro would be smaller and shorter than that, and then everything macro would be larger and longer than that. And then through this matrix, we can then explore, for example, performing an action or a sound that would be, for example, micro in space and macro in time, or vice versa. So we could go into then and do exercises and say, okay, now for 5 minutes we are all going to do micro or micro meso type of actions or sounds. So that was an interesting way of structuring the way we would work with this. So this is just a kind of screenshot from one of the rehearsals where we would kind of stand and do this, where the musicians would use their instruments, including the voice, and then the dancers would work with their bodies. But we also try to also have the dancers work with sound, and the musicians work with motion as well, to really kind of make a cross disciplinary kind of project. One interesting thing that we experienced was the difference between states and actions, where a state is something where you kind of if you're just standing there for 10 minutes, then and fluctuate, that would be more what we can think of a state. You're in the state of standing still. While action is something that is happening at some point in time. And we did some exercises also where you were allowed to do, for example, one action within 10 minutes. So the task was to stand still, and that's the state, for 10 minutes. And then at any point in time, you could do your action, but then you only had that one action, and it should be typically relatively short. So the interesting thing then was that this was a very different task than if you're only standing there for 10 minutes. Because then if you have kind of the thinking about, okay, now what I'm going to do, when am I going to do it, then you kind of start thinking about this very consciously, and suddenly you do it, and then you kind of start to think back at what you did, and that made kind of also change the state to a quite large extent. So we went into this with a kind of very different attitude than just standing there on our own. We also explored having like a macro action, where the action would actually last for 10 minutes. So you would think that, for example, you should move your head 1 centimeter over 10 minutes. And as performers, that made a complete different experience than just standing there. And in fact, we use this in performance to kind of activate our own standstill, and thereby also making it more interesting for people to watch us stand still. We've also explored different types of sonic interaction with this, where, for example, the dancer kind of explored how she could use and work with sine tones. You, sorry, you probably cannot hear this, but here had connected the sine tones to these markers that you see here, and she was able to control these sounds and the fluctuations in the sounds through by moving. Yeah, this is a different one. All these videos are on YouTube if you're interested in listening and watching them. Now, then we developed this into a performance where this was a 45-minute performance where we had 7 parts of different kind of standstill pieces, you could like. And we were only supposed to have a couple of shows, but then it was so popular, so we actually ended up having 8 shows. So people actually enjoyed coming to watch basically nothing or a little bit more. But it was not very much going on in these performances, really. And what we explored after this is from a workshop where we tested out the concept, and we realized that if we are not having people calm down, they wouldn't really be able to get to the level of sensitivity that they needed to be able to appreciate the session. So we ended up having a short standstill session with all the audience members as well before the performances, and only 3 minutes, but that helped calm people down and also kind of appreciate the level of motion that we were working with. So during the performance, we explored a piece that was called head rotation, where one of the dancers, she was moving her head 90 degrees over 5 minutes, so it's a very slow rotation. But and at the same time, she was also controlling the light, so the light was changing from red to blue. So that was one piece. Another piece. I think I'll just skip this one for now. Also, in the interest of time, to be. Oh, where's my there? We explored different types of action-action relationships where one person or one performer would do an action and then kind of get a kind of, it was a call and response type of thing, but with only a few actions. Similar with sounds, so that again short sounds and kind of short sound replies to this from the other performer. Explored also using flashes to kind of just be having it be dark, and then some sudden flashes to expose where the performance was standing. Also explored some granulation sounds where the dancer would control the sound of the violin. And let me see, I'll skip this one here. And then one piece where we're also using then interactive sound with each of the performer wearing a marker on their head, and this controlling a sign tone, and then the ability to control sound by not moving. So this was something I developed that I call um, indirect or kind of or inverse mappings, where the idea is that instead of controlling something by moving, you are controlling it by not moving. And this is something I've explored in other contexts too later. For example, we have a muscle band at University of Oslo where we're using these Maya armbands, and there also we have been exploring how it is to just stand still. And if you're moving, there is no sound, and as you stand stiller, then the sound will gradually increase. The challenge then is that if you want to control the timbre of the sound through the muscles, the sensors on this device, then you will necessarily need to move a little bit. So you can change the timbre, but then the sound will also disappear. So this kind of constant battle back and forth between producing sound and not producing sound, which I think is very interesting to explore. It's confusing for the performers because it's kind of the opposite of what you are used to, but it's also very interesting artistically, I think. We use the same concept with the self-playing guitars, where the same idea is that the guitars are hanging, and they, as you approach them and stand in front of them, they will detect you, and then the sound will appear. And with the guitars, it's also so that the guitars vibrate. They have an actuator in the back, so it's by holding the guitar you can also feel the vibrations in the guitar body as well. So it becomes also kind of a haptic, tactile experience. Yeah, I think I'll skip this to save some time. Let's see, where's my cursor? There we go. Yeah, I'll skip this one too. We've also been performing with these guitars, and then more of in a normal kind of setting, so explore it there. Now, to kind of start wrapping things up so that we have also have time for some questions. So I started out with a question, does music make you move? And at least as far as I've seen through all the championships of Standstill and also the other empirical work I've done on this, yes, I guess that's the short answer, at least to some music. And we have particularly looked at EDM, one type of dance music. There are other types of music that have not been so convincing when it comes to movement. And I would also hypothesize that some types of music could also make people stand stiller. So that's something that would be interesting to explore more in the future. But at least my conclusion so far with what I have is that music can make us move, at least a little. Now, so that's kind of the micro project. Now, I am starting up. I started up a new project now called Ambient, where I'm getting back to the idea of this kind of action perception loop and also the environment. So, after looking at the body for a long time now, I'm interested in also looking at the body in an environment. So the Ambient project really is about investigating the audiovisual qualities of a space, and also possibly the rhythms of an environment and how they influences us. So that's kind of bringing me back to the Still Standing project, where I'm really doing both two things at the same time. I'm both kind of doing data collection for my upcoming book, which will be called Still Standing, I'm currently writing up, and where I'm going to use this data that I'm collecting as part of that. But I'm also then recording these all this audio and video material from different spaces to kind of also get a sense of what happens in an environment really, and how can we get something out of it. So this is just one example. They're standing in a seminar room here at the Department of Musicology. And looking, this is kind of the view you get out of the 360 camera, me standing there, and then the rest of the room. So from this, it's possible to then generate a motiongram, where here time is going downwards, and you see here on this side here, you see the flickering of the light from this. And this, you don't really see that flickering with the naked eye, but it's interesting that it's there. And here you see also, this is kind of things happening outside of the windows, where you have kind of the trees outside moving a little, and also some people, these kind of black dots or kind of lines you see here, that people walking past by, that they also show up in these motiongrams generated from the video. And this is again 10-minute recordings. I also then here, since I'm standing with my mobile phone on my chest, I'm also then collecting accelerometry data. So this is a quantity motion graph generated from this. And the interesting thing here is that you can see my respiration patterns from this, since it's hanging on my chest. So this graph shows a combination of then postural adjustments. There are some larger postural adjustments here that this is quite common to see when you stand still, like happening every 3 minutes or so, and on average. And then there's respiration patterns, but also then the micro kind of things happening in between, which is actually my pulse. So if you look at the spectrum here, calculated from the linear acceleration, you see a very high peak here, and this is actually my pulse showing up in this analysis here very, very clearly, which is an interesting thing. I think that you can detect a pulse just by hanging your phone around your neck. Then you see here a transversal plane. It's kind of like the motion where I'm working, or kind of how I'm moving horizontally. Again, here not seeing the same type of very clear kind of back and forth pattern, but then this again is based on accelerometry data, not the position that I had from motion capture. So it's a little bit of different sensing. And here the spectrogram of the acceleration data, mainly showing how the kind of my pulse is changing, and these are residuals of the pulse there. The respiration patterns doesn't really show up here, but they are at a very different scale in the system. And also the audio waveform. And I'm interested then in looking at what's going on in the audio in the room, and also in the video, and looking at how that correlates with what I'm doing. But I haven't really gotten to the analysis there, since I'm still working on the data collection. So all of this is going into what is the Oslo Standstill database. So all the data from the CERN project, all the data from the micro project, all the data from the Norwegian Championship of Standstill are there. So there are hundreds of recordings of people standing still there, and also all my new data will also be there if anyone is interested in looking at this data. So yeah, I think that kind of concludes what I wanted to say. Just to kind of finally plug that we are running a motion capture course on the FutureLearn platform. If you want to know more about motion capture, we just kind of completed the real-time version of the course, but it's still open, and you can join anytime and follow it if you like. We also have a new course called Pupillometry that we are running for the first time now, which is looking at how the pupil is changing when you listen to music, but also other things. And it's also some eye tracking in there, because you're using eye trackers to capture pupillometry. And finally, that's my book, if you're interested in learning more about my previous projects, and also read some about the still standing stuff also at the end of this book. But I think I'll end there, and let me see if I can stop my screen sharing here now. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions if you have time for it.
Yeah, any questions? I think I enabled people to, yeah, we have a question. Is there a relationship between a person's natural sway frequency and the frequency of the music being played? Does it make them move more?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's also a question of what is a person's natural wave frequency. I guess what we've done in the analysis of the championship data so far, we haven't really looked at this at an individual level. That would be super interesting to do, but we have looked at it more at group levels instead. But yes, it would be interesting to look at that, because we also have, for the championships, at least the last ones, we have also systematically having standstill to silence in between the music parts. So it would be interesting to do some kind of clustering analysis on that to look at that. And of course, also for some of the more longitudinal stuff I have with myself and some others, then that's also a very interesting thing to do. But we haven't done it so far. But yeah, great question.
Any other questions, either typed or verbal? Maybe while we were, oh, yeah.
Yeah, where do the time periods come from? Well, this is coming from Pierre Schaeffer, actually. So my thinking has been very inspired by his approach, and the Sound Actions book was kind of starting out with the idea of looking at impulsive versus sustained versus iterative actions, and also looking at kind of sound objects, and kind of then also Pierre Schaeffer identified the sound object to be kind of within this half a second to 5 second range, which is also kind of fits nicely with this kind of idea of a short-term memory thinking. And then everything shorter and or longer would kind of be unnatural in a way, if you're thinking about it from a more kind of normal type of actions. Most things we do are within kind of this half a second to 5 second range, and most kind of phrases, words, musical phrases as well, are within this limit. So I guess that was kind of the reason we ended up with this longer and shorter than other normal things we would do.
Great. While we wait for, we don't have to wait. You can't unmute yourself. I think I tried. After standing still for many times, do you get better at doing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is no. And I think that's interesting. In the beginning, I thought that perhaps I would get better at this. Now I've done it at least 1,000 times, I think, and I'm not getting better in terms of it. Thinking about the quantity of motion is very similar throughout. And thinking about it, it's not really that strange, because I mean, I'm mainly picking up natural swaying based on respiration and heart rate, plus some variation, of course. But as long as the body doesn't really change that much, then I guess those things would also stay the same. So then I would expect to kind of have the same level of standstill. What does change though is the feeling of doing it and experience of doing it, and I really come to enjoy this. I'm standing still 10 minutes every single day, which is really kind of my moment of and I would call it meditation, although some people might think of it like that. But it's more a break, kind of and a forced break, but also voluntary break. Um, what makes me stressed nowadays is that when I'm standing still in a public or semi-public space, or in a space where people may walk in on me while I'm standing there, feels a bit odd. Then I get a little bit stressed, and that actually makes me move more. But in general, no, I don't get better at doing it. And also the other people that have been doing this systematically, they haven't been better at it either. Yes, Nikki, just to about my new project, hypothesize that we are less conscious of the micro and macro attunements. Yeah, I think in general that at least what I hope to find, or I guess that could be a hypothesis too, is that the environment does influence us. And the reason I started my new project was that I was sitting in my office and I was listening to this incredibly noisy ventilation system I have over my desk, and it has this kind of recurring rhythmic thing. It's kind of got this howling type of ventilation sound, which is really really annoying. I kind of get used to it, but it's coming back to me. And at the same time, also have this radiator that's also making this kind of rhythmic kind of thing happening there. So, and then I have this other thing blinking in the corner, this fire alarm thing. So I was just kind of one day when I was sitting there, I was thinking about this kind of ventilation thing and radiator and this blinking thing, and it's just like, this must have an impact on me somehow. I'm not thinking about it all the time, but it comes back to me. I know that not everyone else is thinking about it in the same way, but now as I've been starting, because I didn't mention that, but in my still standing project this year, I'm standing in one new space every single day, so I'm not allowed to kind of be in the same space. So that's kind of also the forced kind of exploration of different everyday spaces. And so far I've done my number 61 today, and so far I've just kind of come to listen to a lot of ventilation systems or refrigerators and other things, noise like type of things, but many of them with also recurring and rhythmic patterns. And I do think that these things influence actually us. That's my hunch. And of course now this is a very subjective study since I'm only doing it myself now, but the aim is also to kind of do more systematic studies of environments with multiple people as well, and try to see also how these kind of influence our motion, also perhaps also physiological states, and also our feelings of being in these spaces. I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but that's just some thinking at least.
We have another question.
Yeah, Nikki asks again, I wonder if some people are more able to impose order on cognitively parse these external environmental rhythms, that is finding them less disturbing. I'm thinking on neurodiversity. Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I'm doing this project, I'm talking about it to other people, and I've been going into a space and I'm commenting on, for example, oh, there's a ventilation thing happening there or something else, and some people say, "Oh, I never noticed." So people are certainly different. I mean, of course, some of us are more interested in sounds and things going on around than others. Um, so that's kind of, but that's perhaps at the level of understanding. But I mean, in any space we are in, I mean, we are constantly, I mean, we get this stimulation all the time, and I guess we parse it somehow, but even if people don't think about it necessarily, it still influences them. On the other hand, some people actively put on headphones with noise in them to be able to focus. So I mean, that's a way of doing it as well. And I also remember when my kids were younger, I mean, they would also sleep well if they had noise around them. So there are certainly some differences there, but it would be super interesting to do it. And we've spoken about it since at RITMO we have people doing brain imagery, and we also have mobile EEG systems now. So it would be interesting to also do some EEG studies on this, to also to really look at the kind of more what's going on in the brains while this, and particularly standing still also kind of is a good way of doing brain imagery, because you don't have the kind of all the noise necessarily coming into the signal as you would have with if you're moving more.
I'm going to ask a question. What about more specific links to music? So do you think, so for example, I mean, I can imagine listening to music in has implication, because, you know, we listen to classical music, not standing, but being still, and we listen to EDM when we are supposed to dance. Or this. So there are some distinctions there, but do you see other kind of aspects in which this relates to music in a kind of more direct way, or indirect, or kind of interesting insights you gain from this about music in a sense?
Well, I mean, yeah, I know. I mean, I'm kind of pushing the borders of what music is here. Although, I mean, if you think about it from like a John Cagean type of approach, then listening to the spaces, it could be thought of as a musical own thing as well. But one of the things I want to explore in the ambient project is also to look at going from what is kind of basically just the noise or the sounds and environment to also having, for example, more elaborate music there, and but also then again to look at the boundaries between, for example, can you modify something in an environment to make it more music-like? I mean, what would it take to kind of make a more playful space, for example, where we would actually have literally rhythmic things going on as well? So that's one thing. And a completely different note, we did a huge concert experiment in Stavanger a couple of weeks ago, where we worked with the Stavanger Symphony Orchestra, and we actually measured physiological measurements on all the musicians in the whole symphony orchestra, and there's lots of things to say about that. But the ambient part of that project was that we were also playing some environmental sounds to the audience before the concert, to see if that would change the way the audience kind of their audience behavior, but also the experience of the audience of the concert itself. So that would be something that's kind of in between just kind of listening to the environment and listening to more kind of structured sound before a concert. We haven't started the analysis yet, so I have no idea what we will find. But just by looking at it, it felt that listening to different type of environmental sounds calmed down the audience. They made them sit down and kind of focus more and be more also focused, at least in the beginning of the concerts, from what I could see. So it was very interesting to analyze this, because we also captured we had around 1,000 audience members per concert, and they had reflective armbands, and we kind of measured their motion with infrared cameras. So we will be able to also then detect what's going on in the audience there. So that will also be certainly be interesting to look at, kind of, or also then something in between the musical elements and watching and experiencing from the stage versus this pure environmental sounds of the space itself, and then this kind of in between thing happening there. So yeah, lots of things to explore there.
Thank you. Any final question before we say goodbye? Looks like no. I'll stop the recording. So